Avast, ye land lubbers! Welcome back to another genre guide. No.
Period.
Wrong period. Okay.
I've asked you not to do that stuff, but you just keep doing it. So
I do. I'm sorry. It's becoming my shtick. I should call myself the shtick table. But anyway, hello everybody. Welcome back to Genre Guys. And as you might have guessed from my horrible attempt at a little bit of punnery, we are going to be discussing a movie which has a naval theme. And it is one of my favorites. It is Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World. Thank you for joining us again on Genre Guys. I am a Hangry Table, and I'm joined by Lou Washerman's Ghost and Lorn from TPP. And so it's great to be here with you both once again. And I'm really excited to talk about this film because, like I said, it is a favorite of mine. And it inspired me to start reading the novels, of which there are something like 20, and written in just like the most dense prose you can imagine. But all that to be said, how did you guys like this film?
it's been a favorite of mine since it came out. And as I had read the books before the movie.
Oh, really?
Was a fan of them. And they have a huge fan base separate from the movie. And although this is really made from pieces of, mostly of two and actually a little bit from a third one.
Yeah.
I don't know anybody who's a fan of the books who disliked the movie. You know, it's just like, Lorn, what you guys do with Star Wars about whether the movie followed the canon or not. But in this case, literally canon.
I see what you did there.
But it's a rollicking ride. And my God, what a production. What a production. If you don't believe you're really at sea and these guys are in danger 24/7, you're not watching. It's just that simple. Lorn.
Yeah, I would agree. I've got to put a caveat here, which is that I had never seen this movie. I have never read the books. Now, I do have kind of a penchant for the age of piracy, which would have been about 150 years before this movie. And so I love stories of this type. But for some reason, I had never managed to see this one. I always wanted to. I just never got around to it. So I was very happy to watch it. And I think it's a really good movie. I think that if you haven't seen it, it's definitely worth a watch.
And it's interesting that the book for this part of the long story of Captain Lucky Jack Aubrey and his pal and Dr. Maturin, they shifted the time because the original book in this period, it was the War of 1812 and it was America they were fighting with, not France.
Well, I was going to say, yeah.
So they moved it earlier to Napoleonic Wars because, hey, the audience is in America and the money is in America. And the last thing we want to do is have our good guys be against their good guys, so to speak. But these ships, and this is a frigate. This is not a ship of the line with 80 guns. These were the destroyers. The other ships were the battleships, okay? These were the destroyer escorts. These were the little but powerful ships that could go faster and make sharper turns. And remember, it's all about maneuvering. It's all about getting yourself in the best position to shoot at the other guy before he can shoot at you. I would also mention that one sense that you get briefly that is much more detailed in the books. You know what the deadliest thing was on these ships for the people who were in them in battle? Splinters.
Splinters, yeah.
Because the entire thing is made of wood, and a splinter could be as big as a sword and go right through you. But every time they got hit, they had to carry their own carpentry shop and their own spare parts and their own spare sails.
Yeah. Spare masts.
Because there was no port to put into to do a refit. It was just, you're out there in the middle of nowhere. They had some rudimentary charts of where the shallow water was, so they didn't go aground too often. And those charts could have been 50 or 100 years old, and therefore things had changed by the time they got there. So it was quite a deal. That basically the plot of this is that Jack Aubrey, the captain of the Surprise, has been told there's a French privateer. Now remember, when you hear the word privateer, that means they're not in the regular Navy. They've been given a piece of paper from the king that says, go kill the other guys, but if you get caught, you aren't acting officially on our behalf. You're an independent. They're more like official pirates when you mention the age of piracy. A French privateer is heading for the Pacific, and the Brits, of course, had big whaling fleets in the Pacific. And that's what this privateer is after, and they told Surprise, go get him. They had enough intelligence to know that's where he was going, and pretty much not much more than that. And so they are pursuing this ghostly ship, which outguns them, by the way, and is much more sturdy than them because it was actually built in America. And the ship that this fictional ship is based on is actually the USS Constitution, Old Ironsides. Because as you'll see, one of the guys on our ship saw it being built when he was in Boston and made them a model to show how many rafters and how many stays and how strong the sides of this boat are compared to others. That literally with the original old Ironsides, they said that the cannonballs would just bounce off like it was iron.
It was a double hull, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
the keel was important too because it was narrower and it was, I believe, a narrower draft and it had all kinds of speed to it as well.
Right. Because, of course, a keel keeps the boat from rocking and keeps it in a straight line. But if it's too deep, it'll also slow it down because it acts like a sail under the water to any currents that are going across the ship. And when you get into the books, you get into all the details of what sailing these things were like and the names for the various sails, and also the path that you took in your career. Some people, when they first saw this movie, were kind of surprised to see all these little boys on the crew. But that was what you started as a midshipman at age 12 or age 11 or age 10 and worked your way up to lieutenant. And from there onwards, if you lived that long. It's a very, very accurate picture of what life was like on a boat like this.
I was going to say, like this, I feel that number one, it was very true to the books. Number two, I don't think you could find a better film which would depict life like this because they go out of their way to capture all the little details to show you this is what a day is like. This is how the night shift comes on. Even the things like the superstitions, poor Hollum, the gentleman on the right there, falling prey to that sort of thing. Just kind of it sucks you in. It like envelops you and you feel like you're on this boat.
And the other thing is when you say master and commander, you got to understand the captain is God. If he says kill him, kill him. If he says do this, do this. He is the master of his own kingdom in the middle of the vast oceans. And we don't give captains that level of authority anymore. They're all tied into a system because they can communicate, because they can seek advice, because they can coordinate their attacks with other ships. But in those days, it was
something that's important to keep in mind that is also made a point of in this movie is that most of the crew is pressed as well.
Yeah.
And that makes the dynamics aboard ship, especially when things are going not so well, very interesting. And
explain what pressed is, because people may not know.
So back in the day, they would send press gangs out into the community and actually forcibly make you a crew member aboard a ship. They were actually pressed into service. It was a form of near slavery. And so the crew, if they got them very young, you might live your whole life aboard ship, never really intending to enter the service, but here you are. And this is the situation that you now have to deal with. It wasn't that way for everybody, but a lot of ships' crews were pressed into service. And that's where, in the age of piracy, a lot of pirate crews came from, is that if they decided that they were going to mutiny and slaughter their captain, they're now essentially renegades and outlaws, but they've got a ship. And that's where some early democracies were formed, is that they had to, at that point, elect their captains and their senior officers, and everybody had a say in how the ship was to be governed, and the captain could be deposed. So,
but not in the Royal Navy, not without a fight.
No, certainly not. But on pirate ships, that's how a lot of them came to become pirate crews. Is the pressed crew might be pushed just a bit too far and decide, all right, we're going to have a mutiny. And there is some danger of that in this picture for a while.
Yeah. The inspirational speakers were usually left on shore.
Or deposited in the drink shortly thereafter.
But going on in the summary of this film, essentially...
Well, basically, they're chasing the Acheron, and the Acheron stumps him a couple of times, comes out of the fog out of nowhere, has what is known as the weather gauge. And I'm not going to go into the details, but basically, remember that these ships are entirely a subject of the wind, the current, and it's not just the wind on the sails, it's the wind pushing the ship left or right or port or starboard, if you will. And you can only shoot when your guns are aimed at it. The guns have limited aiming ability. They have elevation. And by the way, you'll see in this movie, when they plan on snooking them and pretending to be another ship and having them pull them alongside, they purposely remove the wheels from the back of the guns on one side so that they can tilt them even further down. Because remember, the arc of a cannonball is up into the sky and falling back down on a ship. So if you're too close, you're going to shoot over it unless you can alter that angle. And so the most vulnerable part of any of these ships is the stern. So ideally, what you want to be able to do is cut across their stern as they're going by, because first of all of their cannons are on the two sides. There's only what they might call a bow or a stern chaser in the back. But secondly, because that's the most vulnerable spot, as indeed we learn when the bad guys shoot Surprise's rudder to smithereens and they have to replace it. So they're starting to get a feeling that this ship, which is black and tall and kind of spooky across the water in the fog, might be somehow, their curse. But their duty is to chase it. Although we find out later that the captain, Jack Aubrey, tells Dr. Maturin that his orders stopped at Brazil. He wasn't really supposed to go all the way around. But once he knew they were going after whalers, and he finds that out by finding that they set some of these whalers adrift in a boat from a boat they had taken, he knows he's got to go do that. That's his job. So, and the characters, by the way, of Jack and the doctor is a naturalist. The doctor is a man of science. He is a skilled surgeon, but in the books, he is also a spy for the Brits against the Spanish and the French. And in some of the books, they go ashore and they get into adventures that way. So,
as you can see from this photo here, Captain Aubrey is played by Gladiator, and Stephen Maturin and Dr. Maturin is played by the Vision.
Right, Paul Bettany. And
all jokes aside, they are brilliant in this.
Yeah,
Crowe and Bettany together, they have this chemistry. It's like a seafaring version of Kirk and Spock, basically.
Yeah, I would say that, except that Spock, being the unemotional, the doctor tends to be a little too emotional, and the captain has to call him out. He says, I invite you into my cabin as my friend, but if you're going to question my leadership of this ship, we're going to have a problem, because that's my job, and you really aren't equipped to do it. They're great together. They're absolutely great together. And there are also, remember, this is not all battles and storms. There are these scenes at the officers' mess table where, of course, the famous scene is when the captain goes to the doctor and says, do you see those two weevils, the bugs that are in the bread? And says, which would you choose? He says, what's to choose? They're both identical. He says, no, but if I ask you to choose one. He says, okay, the one on the left. He says, why? Well, he's longer, he's stronger, he's more likely to survive. And he says, doctor, you've made the classic mistake. In the service, we always choose the lesser of two weevils. And the crowd loves that. The rest of the guys around the table. But it really gives you, and by the way, I don't know if you guys caught it, because it's really a detail gone into in the books and just in passing. Whenever they're setting up to battle or setting down from it, you'll see all these walls being moved around.
Yep.
The captain's cabin in the back is only the captain's cabin when they're not at war. They tear down the walls and bring the cannons in, and it's part of the gun deck. And there's
the first instance of hot desking, I think.
Yeah, that's right. That's what it would be. Of course, eventually, after a lot of subterfuge and a lot of time and a lot of exploration of the weird flora and fauna of the Galapagos Islands, which was actually, this was filmed there to some degree, they catch up with the other ship and they decide to make themselves look like a whaler that's badly sailed and poorly manned, and so that the other ones will come right up alongside so they can jump on board and do all of that Errol Flynn sword fighting stuff that we remember. And these ships carried a complement of Marines with rifles who would be way up in the tops of the sails to shoot down on the deck, aiming at officers, of course, because they hoped that leadership would be absent. And I don't know, I don't think it really spoils it to say that they take the ship, they take the Acheron. And by the way, the object was not always to sink the other guy. What you wanted was to take him as a prize. Mm-hmm. And these ships would be sent into a port, and a prize court would say, well, that ship is worth X and sold to the British Navy. And everybody on the crew got a piece of the prize money. So you'd rather not sink them if you didn't have to. you'd rather take them over. But of course, that means taking over the crew. And through a subterfuge, they find out that they didn't really get who they thought they got. And at the end, they're chasing after him again, and onward goes the story, and that's the end of the movie. But this movie was astoundingly well produced, and I don't just say that because a dear friend of mine produced it, who I was sad to see when I researched this, that he passed away a couple of years ago. A guy named Duncan Henderson, wonderful guy. But they set up, this was shot at the same studio that James Cameron had built in Baja, in Rosarita Beach, for Titanic. And so the ship, parts of the ship, are on that big arm that you saw in all the publicity about Titanic that tilted the ship to an angle so you could see it sinking. A lot of that was done down there. And these guys showed up, I think, a month before they started filming to be taught how to be sailors. And they learned all of these crafts of rope wielding and sail setting. And on these ships, usually on Sunday, they'd have what they call a make and mend day, where they'd go through and splice the splices that needed doing and polish the things. And so when you see the two of them talking in the foreground and the ship is going on in the background, it isn't a bunch of extras standing around or being told, well, you pull this rope, you walk over here. It's guys going about their duty as members of the crew because they've been trained to do it, even though they're not originally sailors. And of course, the costumes and the hair and everything is so true to period in ways that some people might be surprised to see. So,
I mean, on that note, some of the trivia for the film includes the fact that they really, really, really tried to make this film as authentic as possible. And so on that subject, apparently 2,000 hats were made, 1,900 pairs of shoes, and 400 pounds of hair were used on the actors for wigs.
But the biggest thing they did was bought the boat. This boat that they used, which was originally called the Rose, was a replica of a real ship called the Rose of a similar vintage to Surprise. And they bought it. And by the way, you can go aboard her today. She, after the movie, was given to the San Diego Maritime Museum, and it's there, and I've been aboard her. And, occasionally they take her out for twilight cocktail sales and all kinds of things. And of course, built as a replica, it does have a couple of engines down below. But she's real. The Surprise is real. The Rose originally was real. And the Rose had quite a history in 1812 and in the Napoleonic Wars. So, and there's lots of things you see in this about these ships where if they were becalmed, they'd put guys in rowboats and pull them. Or the thing where the Acheron at night is chasing them based on the very distinctive signature of the anchor light, which is the big lantern on the stern, and the three lights in the windows of Jack's cabin. So they build out of barrels a fake stern of the ship and set it adrift and turn off the other lights and on the lights on the fake so they can send the bad guys on their merry way in the dark chasing a specter. So much. There it is. And as you can see, the whole reason that was built down there was that when you shot across the decks, you didn't see the shore between you and the ocean. You just saw endless ocean. And it's on an arm, and it can be lifted and twisted and turned. And that's the Rosarita. Now they've got sound stages down there, and they've got a little bit of a street. It's been used in Bond films and all different kinds of things. But that's the studio that Titanic built. So they were very fortunate to have that to make this movie. I don't know how they would have made it otherwise.
I was going to say, I thought you were going to say that this was the same tank they used for Waterworld.
No. There was no tank. The only tank for Waterworld is the Waterworld show at Universal Studios. But anyway, and they actually, of course, were out on the real ocean in the real boat for quite a bit of this too. Because there's nothing like that sense of nothing. And in fact, one of the reasons why they did it way to the south of Rosarita, if you look on a map and look up this studio, you'll see it's not right in town, is the last thing you want when you're doing a sailing ship of this era is to have somebody's cabin cruiser or catamaran sail through the background. So
Sea-Doo, yeah. Well, I have to say, watching this film, it really is okay. So as someone who's a fan of science fiction, obviously I love model work, I love computer graphics and so on and so forth, but the authenticity, the realness of this really blew me away. It's very, very hard to see where there were any special effects used or CGI, and it's very few and far between.
There are some model shots in this.
There are, yeah.
Weta, the people down in New Zealand who did Lord of the Rings, do some ships, but not many.
But I mean, like this, going back to what I said, you feel kind of sucked into this movie because not only are you kind of you're made privy to the ins and outs of daily life on the ship, but the ship itself just feels so darn real with the creaking and the noises, the bell.
Oh, the sound mix on this is amazing too, and also the winds and the rain and the storms.
Yeah.
You know, when they go around the horn, people died doing that all the time down there. That was not a good place to be.
Yeah, it was cold, ice, snow.
And that's another thing people don't understand about ships. They didn't really show it in this movie, and I was kind of surprised. When you get snow on the decks, you got to shovel it off. And the reason is it adds to the weight of the ship and will actually push it down deeper than it wants to ride. So there's no rest. There is no rest. And when you read the books, you have them, they see the other ship way off in the distance, and they say, well, it's going to take us X number of hours to catch up to her if the wind doesn't change. So pipe the men to dinner now and get them good and fed so we can douse the cook fires and be ready when the time comes. Nowadays, the first time you see them is when you're dead because everything is fought at such long distances, But imagine a time when all you had, there was no radar, there was no sonar, is that a crappy little telescope to figure out what somebody was doing and where they were going and who they were, especially if it was foggy. As you'll see at the very beginning of the movie, that comes out of the fog and oops, there it is. So
that's part of the plot point. And again, shades of Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan.
There you go, the Maturin Nebula.
The Maturin Nebula with the Enterprise and the Reliant kind of
very much similar. Very good call. Absolutely.
And it's basically, and I mean, of course, Star Trek itself was based on the classic kind of seafaring tales like Horatio Hornblower and the like. But the dynamic you've got here is very original series, I find. And it's a charming movie. It's a movie that you watch, you leave, and you feel good about yourself for some reason. The music also carries it so far.
The captain and the doctor like to play music as a diversion.
Violin.
Russell Crowe actually taught himself how to play the violin for this movie.
Really?
And said it was the toughest thing he ever did for any movie.
Wow.
Now, in point of fact, he is really playing, but that's not him you hear. They dubbed in some professionals.
Yeah, I hope so.
But his fingering is right. And that was a very expensive antique violin that he bought. And supposedly it was later sold for, I think, $150,000 or $200,000 or more.
Wow.
They are actually playing and music of the period and music that's cited in the books as their favorite pieces. So, you got to have a hobby. If you ever wondered where all these ships in a bottle and other things that come off of the old ships were, it's because you were out there for months and months and months and months, and you might not see another ship for all that time. So,
yeah, it was either that or you go crazy. Well, this film opened up in 2003, November 14, and it had a budget of $150 million. And it returned a box office of $211.6 million, which it didn't lose money, kind of respectable, but it wasn't, a smash hit, unfortunately, which is a real darn shame because I could have seen.
They wanted to make more, but the studio just said it didn't justify investing more money into it.
And that's a real shame because I think they really had hit something special with this production, with this.
Well, but I'll tell you this, based on my knowledge of the books and of the history, another One Ship Chases Another Ship movie wouldn't have been what they'd have to do. Yeah. They would have had to do some of the missions where they go on land and they take forts and they do this and that. And man, that starts getting even more expensive because you're talking a much bigger extra cast and a much bigger set building job than just a ship in the middle of the ocean. So a sequel would have cost considerably more.
But would it have, Lou? Because I've always, and again, I am going to defer to your expertise on this because I've always been under the impression, based on the whole Waterworld debacle, is that any filming that's done on water triples the cost. And
but that's what that arm in Baja does, is take some of that out of it.
Right.
Because the problem with water is everything moves and they don't move together. And you don't have to go to a Waterworld. You can go back to Jaws. The camera's on one boat. The boat is another boat. The lighting is on another boat. And if they all rocked in sync with each other, life would be sweet, but they don't. They just don't. And they set off currents against each other, and you got to shoot a lot. Now, Waterworld was insane. Waterworld was ultimately insane. To give you an idea, in the golden age of environmentalism, you might remember that the bad guys in Waterworld on their little skiffs and things had 30 cal machine guns shooting at each other. If anybody's ever seen a 30 cal machine gun, 30 caliber shells are big. And even though these were blanks, the cartridges still go flying off into the water. Well, they were shooting way off the coast of Oahu, but close enough to come in every night. They hired hard hat deep sea salvage divers to go out there and pick up the spent shells, because we wouldn't want to affect the environment. Not that there aren't 8 million of those out there left over from World War II that nobody's ever picked up.
Right.
But that starts adding to the cost rather prodigiously. So lots of stuff like that on that movie.
But on that note, then, would it have been more expensive to film another adventure on the land in a soundstage, maybe? I don't know.
Well, but the problem is it's not a land story; it's a sea story. So there's this balance of what they have to do. If you read the books, you'll see that a lot of the plots involve where we're going to sneak up on the opposite side of the island from the fortress we want to hit, because there's something else you need to know about war in that era. It was an axiom, and it was true, that no ship could win a gunnery battle against a well-built fort with big guns, period. They would eventually kill you. And the reason was they weren't rocking around, and they were there all the time. And so they knew that to get into the harbor and do your piracy or whatever you were going to do, you had to turn here because there was a reef on the other side that everybody knew about. And so all they did was zero the guns in on the most likely place you would be when the cannonball got there, and just know when to push the button and fire it. So in order to get around that, in the book, what they would do was land a bunch of the land guys on the overgrown far side of the island, figure it would take them 2.5, 3 days to march over there. And then when they saw the fort blow up, then they'd come in the boat and pick everybody up and do whatever it is they were going to do. Well, that's a pretty expensive proposition, movie-wise.
True enough.
So anyway, it was a great movie, and it was a one-off, unfortunately. And everybody involved wanted to do another one, but that's life.
Well, never say never, because in the books, I mean, Russell Crowe is playing a very svelte Captain Jack Aubrey here. In the books, he's described as a bit more portly, rotund, I think a bit older as well. So, I mean, you could have a sequel to it with a more book accurate Captain Jack. I don't know, maybe.
Can I ask a question seriously? And I'm probably in the minority in this. They're currently making a sequel, a remake of Gladiator, another of his great movies.
Oh, yeah.
Does anybody care? I mean, that movie to me was so wonderfully right. It's like, leave it alone. This penchant for sequels, at least the storylines are all there for you with this one. Some of these other things, it's like, well, what if we do everything that was great in the other movie, but we put it in a brothel, or we put it on the planet that's jungle rather than desert, or we put it, and it's like, yeah, so you're going to do the same thing over again, and you think it's going to get, what you want is a bigger response than the original, not a lesser one. So, and that's part of it too, is that not most sequels, they might do as well as the first one, but not a lot better. And so the fact that this made money, but not a lot, made the potential. And now, remember, before they started this, very expert people like my buddy Duncan went over budgets and went over logistics and went over all the things that go into making this movie, which are considerable, and came up with a price. But now that they've actually done it, they know that, well, maybe we underestimated on this particular piece, or maybe we figured too many days for this particular piece. The more you know, the more accurate you're going to be about the sequel, in theory. And maybe that accuracy meant, oh, well, a sequel is really going to cost a lot more than we thought it would because of what we know now that we didn't know then. So that's movies and budgets.
My guess is that they probably wouldn't do a sequel today. They would just reboot the series if they wanted to do something like that.
Yeah, well, but again, when you say reboot the series is there with 21 books. The last one he didn't finish, and it's been finished for him by other people. There's lots of other episodes in the life of these people. So the question becomes, if you don't use Crowe, for example, And you have the ship. By the way, part of their deal with the San Diego Museum was that if they ever needed it again, they could have it. So the ship is going to be there as long as they keep it running. So there's that possibility.
I mean, I would say, yeah, like a sequel to Gladiator. It's like doing a sequel to The Fugitive, where Harrison Ford gets framed by another one-armed man again. Like it's completely unnecessary. But in this case, with the just a vast amount of source material, and I would say that the author of these books, Patrick O'Brien, maybe this will get me into trouble for saying this, but I feel that he's basically the Tolkien version of naval books.
Oh, absolutely. I would agree. Except, of course, Tolkien had to make it all up.
Right.
This guy was able to research it. And by the way, people who knew him said he was a lousy sailor, for what it's worth. I mean, they'd go out with him on a boat and I'll just watch. So there you go. But again, the difference between you're making it all up as you go along based on the archetypal legends and what have you is harder, I think.
So all that to be said, like there is just a vast amount of absolutely brilliant content that's just sitting out there waiting to be adapted and brought to the big screen. And if they could pull it off in the way that they did this movie, I don't think there would be a single fan who would be disappointed. The last that we heard about a potential sequel, I think, was from Russell Crowe in 2009, but that was kind of it. Well, which is a shame.
Well, no, but they say, hey, if we put it together, would you be interested? He says, sure. What's he going to say? No.
Yeah.
You mean if you actually put it all together and it's ready to go and you want me and you want to give me $20-30 million, would I do it? Hell yeah. I had a good time and I like the people. So, why not? But that's a lot of what ifing and
true.
God, sequels are tricky. Or reboots or whatever you want to call them these days. And like you said, there's so much original stuff out there. But remember the mentality of the number crunchers. The mentality of the number crunchers is if you're going to do an adaptation of an original book, let's say, as a movie, you better show me that book is A, was popular enough when it was new, and B, that people still give a damn.
Yeah.
So, there was a guy named Ernest. God, I can't think of his last name now. But
Hemingway?
He was famous because he had a workshop, a series of classes in New York about how to write musicals. And his contention was that a Broadway musical always had to be an adaptation of something else, whether it was a play or a book or whatever. Because until you had really, really, really worked the story completely, adding music to it was playing with fire. So there are these rules out there, and they're an easy fallback for executives in search of longevity in their jobs. So,
well, Lorn, this is your first time seeing it, your first time exposed to it. Do you feel an urge to perhaps read the books or rewatch it again? Or
I would consider it, yeah, if I had time, because I do like stories about naval combat. And
the books are really good, Lorn. I mean, they're better than you think they would be. They really, really are.
They sparkle.
Now, I told you before we began recording this that I was going to have difficulty talking about it because this was my first exposure to the movie. And unfortunately, while trying to watch it, I got interrupted several times. So I wasn't going to remember anybody's names. But I'll tell you what really struck me about the movie. And that was, you've already talked about the wardrobe, the costumes, the ships themselves, the sails, the ropes, the blocks, the tackles, the hammers, the carpentry. All of it's there, including the gunners having their individual powder cartridges in the little pigeonholes where they got to keep them before they go into combat. They get all the small details right. One of the things that startled me, because this should have occurred to me at the beginning of the movie, and it didn't, and it's another thing that they got right, is the movie does open pretty rapidly with a naval engagement. They get into combat right away, and one of the midshipmen is injured, and he's got a broken arm. And you think, okay, he's got a broken arm. They'll set it and splint it, and he'll be fine. But he's also had some splinters, and they have to amputate it. And this is a young kid, and
really young.
Yeah, we're talking probably 10, maybe 11.
Yeah, I was going to say about 10, 11, 12, someplace in there.
Yeah, and when a lot of times when you're reading these period naval pieces, a lot of times they'll get into the surgery of the time, and it was brutal and horrific and just awful. And it gets every one of those details right. And I loved that. This for me, I think, is the most authentic naval combat movie that's a period piece that I think I've ever seen.
I think it's the best ever made. It really is.
Yeah.
When you get into one of those broadsides, when they're just feet apart and cannons are going off and you've got splinters and timbers going everywhere. Also, inside ship close combat. I don't think I've ever seen it filmed as well as in this particular movie. And it is absolute chaos. It would be terrifying to be involved in any bit of this. And it really captures that really
well. I will tell you something I bet you didn't know that'll shock you, that I discovered when I really got into these books and I started reading about them. Do you know that up through World War I, British Navy ships still had swords and pistols in cases on deck in case they had to go hand in hand with another ship?
No kidding.
I mean, we're talking steel ships, but they were still ready to, do the Errol Flynn thing with a rope and go over there and kill the guys.
That's fantastic.
That just blew my mind.
Well, we were just talking about in a different movie that we were reviewing, as the Civil War was the first mechanized combat that existed. Yeah. And up until that point, you still had armies lining up against each other in square formation, marching towards each other with musket balls flying. Yeah. So it takes a little while to develop new combat tactics and techniques.
I have said in the past that steam train engines were the Starship Enterprise of their day as far as the complexity and the technology. And that's true of these ships too. They were so refined because if that's all you had and it was winning or losing, then everybody's mind is, well, if we shaved a half an inch off this side, would that make it go faster? If we shaved the rudder down a little bit, would it make it turn faster? Those little edges, you could have two ships come off the same shipyard and be a little different. And the guy that knew where his advantage was and where his weakness was and that of the other ship, like the scene in this movie where one of the guys who saw the other ship being built builds a model to show him where the stout areas are and where the weak areas are. That's a huge advantage. That's a huge, huge advantage.
No, I cannot say enough about this film. I think we've already spoken quite a bit about what we like. And was there anything you guys disliked in this movie, by the way?
I can't think of anything. One of the other things that I did like, and this isn't a dislike. I'm just going to point out another thing that I liked is we talked about the superstition aboard the ship.
Yeah.
And that was common at the time. And in this case, one of my favorite things about the movie is that, in a way, Russell Crowe's character is chasing his Moby Dick. He becomes obsessed with the idea of capturing the Acheron. And in doing so, he drives the crew. He's known as Lucky Jack, but it looks like his luck is starting to fail, and he refuses to give up this quest when he's already exceeded his orders, and he pushes the crew almost to the point where they might start considering mutiny, but it doesn't get there. And part of that is because there comes a point when he realizes what he has risked. And when that's brought home to him, he realizes, I have to back off a little bit. And I think that's the sign of a good captain, and that's why the crew respects him.
And that's kind of the advice he gives to the young man who's the Jonah about how to be in command, about how you can push him, but you can't push him too far. And that fine line is how you learn how to be an officer.
Indeed. Well, this movie is brilliant. It is, like I said, one of my favorites. I've seen it numerous times. I can't say enough good things about it. And I'm so glad that we were able to cover it. If you haven't seen it, I would highly recommend you do so. And if you have, why don't you leave us your thoughts down below? We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to see what your thoughts are. What did you think? Did you have any qualms with this film? Do you think there were things that could have been better? Would you have wanted to see a sequel? I mean, all of these are very good questions, and we'd love to hear your answers. So
here's a great line before we go. Roger Ebert gave it 4 out of 4 stars, and here is his summation of this movie. I think really, really says it. It achieves the epic without losing sight of the human.
That is very on.
Isn't that right on? Isn't that just right on?
That really is. Well, speaking of human, or perhaps superhuman, the next show we will be doing, or you will be doing rather.
We're going to have a guest. We're going to have a guest genre guy. And since he is a monster, we thought we'd give him a monster movie, but not in the classic sense, but in the size sense. And so Lorn and I will introduce Marvin the Monster to the niceties of the genre guy next time with a pretty classic piece of filmmaking. And
you would say it's a super film.
I would say that no matter how we may butcher our coverage, we are never going to kryptonite it. Let's put it that way. If that doesn't tell you, I don't know what does. But anyway, stay tuned for that. And he was a master and commander. And anyway, we hope you enjoyed this, and we hope you'll watch it if you haven't. And if you haven't in a long time and sort of vaguely remember it, watch it again. Yeah. Watch it again. Watch it 100%. Again. Share it with family and friends and people who may not know. And you can tell them it's worth the watch. It's a superhero movie without capes. Yeah. Or spandex.
Star Trek without phasers.
Yes. Well, I don't know about that, but
all right. On that note, we will bid you adieu and see you next time on The Genre Guys.
We hope you enjoyed that special presentation of The Genre Guys here on 23PO. Be sure to subscribe to this channel for more content like it. And if you want to enjoy every episode of The Genre Guys as soon as they are released, be sure to become a member at WW Pro's YouTube channel. What were your thoughts on this amazing film? Let us know in the comments below, and thank you so much for watching. T3PO. Please comment, like, and share this video, and don't forget to subscribe to That Park Place Podcasts Online, your source for exclusive content and highlights from WDW Pro, The Pro Show, and That Park Place for all the news that should be fun.